This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome to Heard Tell. It is August the 12th. That's a Friday, folks. You made it. Congratulations. Welcome to Friday. It's the end of the week. Glad to have you along with us for this edition of Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. We're going to turn down the noise on a couple different things that are going on out there in the world, especially the news media that's just had a crazy loud week. But we're going to take a step away from the politics from one big story. Guy up in Michigan made his own internet service provider because he couldn't get AT&T and Comcast to give him internet service for less than $50,000 worth of hookup fees. Great story up there. A little Yankee ingenuity to be on the program today. Also, at the end of the show, we're going to do what we always do. We're going to end on a good note. This one comes from a good friend of ours, Rufus Hickok. He's a great writer, ordinary-times.com, writes a great Sunday column every Sunday for us. He highlights a charity up in New York City that's using food to help take care of people. We always love highlighting stories like this. Great couple up there doing amazing things with food, and not just any food, not your soup kitchen fare, chef quality food for folks. Really cool story. We'll go to that in just a little bit. We're going to have two different interview segments today. Let me tell you about the first one, and then we'll talk about a special one. Alexander Jelloian is our main guest today. Going to talk about Africa. Africa, as we all know, has a long history of people coming in from the outside, exploiting what they want, getting what they want, and taking it out. There's a new players in this game, but it's a very old game. And the new players are the world powers be. China, Russia, other countries, but especially China is really investing in Africa. What can Africa do about it? What can the rest of the world do about it to prevent their imperialistic ambitions in Africa? We'll talk to Alexander Jelloian, another great Young Voices contributor, in just a little bit on the program. Also, something we haven't done in a while, but we want to get back to it. We've been talking about it on the show. We've been teasing it, as they say in the biz. We've been working on this. We're really excited to get back to it because of the way this program is structured for radio and podcasting and YouTube. Even though we give our guests a lot more time than a lot of shows do, usually 20 to 30 minutes, give or take, you still can't get into all the stuff we want to get into. Kind of miss doing the old podcast stuff. By the way, we got 36 of the old podcasts up wherever you're listening or watching this program right now on. Just go look for them under Heard Tell Podcast. There's a playlist on YouTube of them too. We want to get back to some of those because there's some things going on in the world that we really want to deep dive. The first one is ready to go. It's going to be out this weekend. We've got to talk to our friend Chris Schlock. He was at CPAC Dallas in person. We're going to skip the national narratives. We're going to get into those viral moments people saw on their social media feeds, the big names, what was going on, the controversies, the news-making items. In this particular clip, we're going to talk about that Brandon Straka thing where he dressed up as a prisoner in the cage. Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene came in. It was all, in his own words, performance art. But did you know this went on for hours? And did you know it was part of a bigger program of attacking another sitting congressman to his face while he was sitting there? This is a lot more to this story because Chris was there and he can explain it to us. We're going to give you a snippet of that long form conversation that's coming this weekend. Really proud to be getting back to those deep dives. We've already got a couple of them lined up and recorded. You're going to love it. Got one on Machiavelli we got coming up. It's going to be a lot of fun, things like that. Now, first though, let's talk about how we ourselves consume media. We talk about accountability. We talk about the media. One of the reasons we started this program is because we wanted to turn down the noise of the news cycle, get the things that really matter. If we're going to do that, though, we got to start with the variable in that. You and me, how we consume the news is very much on our own heads. See, here's the thing with technology. We have now reached a place where you can tailor and make your news consumption exactly what you want it to be. You can only watch what you want to watch. You can only hear what you want to hear. You have the ability with your technology, with social media, with news feeds, with programming, with blogs, whatever you want to add into your information rotation. You can only hear what you want to hear if you're really careful about it. Now, there's a couple of different ways they talk about it. People talk about it being silo, as in intercontinental ballistic missile silos. You're down in this hole and you're bunkered in. You don't see anything but the sky above you, and you only react when you're shooting something off. Well, there's truth to that. I get that. I think it's more important than that. This is more like a buffet thing where you go and you just pick off what you want to eat and leave everything else. There's still plenty of good food there. You just chose not to take it in. Let's use an example from this real week. We talked about the Mar-a-Lago search warrant. Everybody lost their minds. That was on Monday night. We're now on Friday. What in the world were we doing on Monday night? When this news broke, I already wrote about it. We talked about it before in the program. We were just going to watch some Grease because Olivia Newton-John had passed away, sadly. We're going to watch some Grease. We had a little bit of a cookie situation where the cookies didn't turn out just right. Normal family stuff. Took a few minutes out of that. We marked on the case of the Mar-a-Lago search warrant, realized after about 15 minutes the talking heads didn't have any new information whatsoever to give on, and I turned it off and went back about my business. And then as the week has gone on, we've learned a little bit more, not a lot. Attorney General Merrick Garland made a statement on Thursday that might change some people's mind. It may not. It may reinforce people's opinions. But now we're on Friday. I just want you to take a minute and think back about the week and the loudest story of that week. When everybody was reacting to this on Monday, let's be really honest about something. Nobody knew anything. They didn't know anything about the warrant. They didn't know anything about the underlying affidavits that get you the search warrant. They didn't know anything about the process. They didn't know whether what was alleged about former President Trump was true or not. Now, as the story developed, we learned things like they had been there in June, like they had been in contact with Trump's folks, that we know that he took material from the White House. And then it further develops. We learn about how the warrant was processed, the judge that signed off on it. All these things started to develop as the week went on. But on Monday night, when the news first broke and people were so outraged, or they were so excited that they were finally going to get him this time, that kind of nonsense. If you were just reacting strongly, take a moment and admit to yourself, you didn't really know anything. You just saw the headline, processed it through what you wanted to be true or what you thought would be true or how it felt or how it looked. And that's what you were reacting on. We all do it. I'm not condemning you. I do it too. Everybody does it. But maybe we should learn the lesson of not reacting so strongly to things we really don't know what's going on. So now that we're to Friday, here's what happens. Are you going to be open to any new information on this story because you dug in so hard on Monday? Was that initial outrage developed and grooved emotion into you so much that no matter what happens here going out, you've already made up your mind about this story? And I'm just using this as an example. All news stories and all news cycles have this happen to them. They are built for you to react to, for you to click on, to you go running to a TV set, for you to start following people to find out what's going on. That's how the news media is designed to keep you engaged emotionally. But we talk about on this program all the time, turning down the noise, getting to the information, discerning what's going on, and taking that step back to understand these things didn't happen in a vacuum. Donald Trump didn't just show up at Mar-a-Lago. He's got decades and decades of his own behavior to factor into this. The FBI didn't just show up at Mar-a-Lago. They've got decades and decades of history, good and bad, that we have to parse out. And of course, there's political implications to everything that goes on when you're dealing with a former president and the administration of a sitting president. These are complicated issues. They're not going to fit into a nice tight box for you. And they're probably not going to fit your priors real perfectly unless you do what we started out talking about. Silo your information to only hear what you want to hear. That's not what we do here. This isn't the tickle your ears show. This is the get to the truth show. And part of getting to the truth is understanding our own biases and our own priors, and understanding that if you were reacting really strongly on Monday night to this story, when you really didn't know what was going on, because you didn't, be honest, you were assuming, you were guessing like everybody else. Part of the problem with our news media, it starts with us. Good news is that's the part we can fix the easiest because we have control over it. More Herd Tell right after this. Welcome back to Herd Tell. Okay, a little bit different. Let's talk about some good old-fashioned Yankee ingenuity. This is from ARS Technica. Great website. We'll link to it. Jared Mach, the Michigan man who built a fiber-to-home internet provider because he couldn't get good broadband service from AT&T or Comcast, is expanding with the help of a $2.6 million in government money. When we wrote about Mach back in 2021, he was providing service to about 30 rural homes, including his own, with his ISP, Washtenaw Fiber Properties LLC. Mach now has about 70 customers and will extend his network to nearly 600 more properties with money from the American Rescue Plan's coronavirus state local fiscally recovery funds. The U.S. government allocated Washtenaw County $71 million for a variety of infrastructure projects, and the county devoted a portion to broadband. The county concluded a broadband study before the pandemic to identify unserved location, Mach said. When the federal government's money became available, the county issued a request for proposals, or an RFP, seeking contractors to wire up addresses that were, quote, they known to be unserved or underserved based on the existing survey. They had this gap-filled RFP, and in my own wild stupidity or brilliance, I'm not sure which yet, I bid on the project in my area and managed to win through a competitive bidding process, he said. Mach's ISP is one of 4 selected by Washtenaw County to wire up different areas. Mach's network currently has about 14 miles of fiber, and he's building another 38 miles to complete the government-funded project. In his sparsely populated rural area, I have at least 2 homes where I had to build a half mile to get to one house, Mach said, noting that it will cost over $30,000 for each of those homes to get served. The contract between Mach and the county was signed in May of 2022 and requires him to extend his network to an estimated 417 addresses in Freedom, Lima, Lodi, and Scotia townships. Mach lives in Scotia, which is next to Ann Arbor. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If not, deal with it, Michigan. You'll be okay. Although the contract just requires service to those 417 locations, Mach explained that his new fiber routes would pass 596 potential customers. I'm building past some addresses that are covered by other programs, but very likely to be the first mover in building in those areas. Under the contract terms, Mach would provide 100 Mbps systematic internet. I don't know all these terms. Just going to be upfront with you. Y'all can Google it later. With unlimited data for $55 a month. That sounds like a pretty good deal. And 1 Gbps with unlimited data for $79 a month. Mach said his installation fees are typically $199. Unlike many large ISPs, Mach provides simple bills that contain a large single item for internet service and no extra fees. What a concept. Spectrum, are you listening? Go talk to this guy because your service sucks, your customer service sucks even worse, and your product is unreliable. Go let this guy show you how to do it. That's a personal message for me. Mach also committed to participating in the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, which provides subsidies of $30 a month for households that meet income eligibility requirements. The contract requires all project expenses to be incurred by the end of 2024 and for the projects to be completed by the end of 2026. But Mach aims for a much quicker timeline, telling ARS that his goal is to build about half of it by the end of the year and the other half by the end of 2023. The exact funding amount is $2.6 million. They got it down to the absolute penny here. Operating an ISP isn't Mach's primary job, and he's still a network architect at Akamai, I think you say. He started planning to build his own network about 5 years ago after being unable to get modem service from any of the major companies. As we wrote it last year, AT&T only offers DSL with download speeds of up to 1.5 Mbps at his home. He said Comcast once told him they would charge him $50,000 to extend his cable network to his house. And that he would have gone with Comcast, they'd only wanted $10,000. Comcast demanded those upfront fees for the line extensions when the customers are outside the network area, even if the rest of the neighborhood is already hooked up to Comcast. Mach was able to use 50 BPS fixed wireless service before switching over to his own fiber network. In addition to his home internet customers, Mach told us he provides free 250 Mbps service to a church that was previously having trouble. Mach said he also provides fiber backhaul to a couple of cell towers for a major mobile carrier. Mock has already hooked up some of the homes on the list of required addresses. Washtenaw County issued a press release saying this creates a path for every household to access high-speed broadband internet. The county says it's investing $15 million in broadband. The handholds that are buried underground at various points through Mock's network used to cost $300, now about $700. Inflation's getting everybody. While Mock built the network for using his own money, he said one wealthy family last year wrote nearly a six-figure check to fund a network expansion that let them and all their neighbors get internet access. Over the last year, Mock was using the rented air compressor to blow out the conduits because they accumulate water on the other end, a mile away. People thought it was smoke coming from the ground. They called the fire department. One day they couldn't figure out what was coming up. Next day I saw them. I turned around and I talked to them about it. I saved in people's cell phone as the fiber cable guy. Good old-fashioned Yankee ingenuity. Love it. Great piece. You can follow at ARS Technica. There's also some back pieces and background on this guy. Pretty cool stuff. More Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Let's go to Africa. We've been talking about it periodically, various things. A lot of geopolitics cross paths down in Africa. It's been that way for hundreds of years. It will be like that for the next 100 years. But right now, in the here and now, there's some really important stuff going on with some very familiar world players that we do see in the news media. Let's go to another one of our great Young Voices contributors. He is an intern at the Initiative for African Trade and Prosperity. He's studying a master's at the London School of Economics. And if you're from Logan and don't know what that is, they don't just let you walk in there. That's a prestigious thing. That's kind of an important school. Alexander Jelloian, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Andrew. Thank you for the nice introduction. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about Africa.
Thrilled to be with you. Let's start big picture. And we deal with truth. We talk all the time. One of our core values on this program is things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a sequence. Africa has always been somewhat chaotic. The Horn of Africa and Somalia, that has been conflict for all of yours and mine lifetimes. We know about Somalia, Black Hawk Down, all that stuff. We know the problems in Central Africa. Libya in the north is a failed state. We know about the issues in South Africa. Even though that's more of a developed area, they still have problems. Africa has always been a problem. Africa has always had something of a power vacuum. And there's been colonial and imperialistic interest in Africa for as long as there's been recorded human history. These problems aren't new. Just the players are new, and they're familiar players to us, people like China, like Russia. Give us the big picture of what's going on in Africa right now today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think your premise is absolutely true, where Africa was, a very big deal back in the Cold War time, different kind of spheres of influence, Soviet influence, American influence, and then fast forward to today, and, after about maybe 2 decades or so of things kind of calming down there in terms of, who the major players are, with the U.S. kind of taking that role. Now we see a huge resurgence of, what I really see as authoritarianism from the Chinese and the Russians, and then the United States. So if I had to characterize the situation right now, I think you have an interesting play where you have 2 authoritarian regimes in Russia and China that are slowly and steadily kind of creeping and furthering their interests into that region of the world. And you have the U.S. and the West kind of backtracking and trying to respond to that. So we can get into a little bit about kind of the ins and outs of how that's going on, kind of the economic, political, foreign policy interests that each side has. But it is a big deal because Africa is growing, not just population-wise, but also economically. They're going to play an increasingly important role as the future goes on. And so I think if the U.S. doesn't respond to these threats, we'll be in for some long-term trouble if we don't make a pivot right now, in my opinion, in our strategy down there. So, yeah.
What is the biggest thing we need to pay attention to in Western media, though? Because there's a lot of stuff we're going to move. We're going to work through an article that you wrote here in just a second. There's so many moving parts to this. China, Russia. There was just a big CNN report about Russia and doing the gold mining and how they're stripping resources that way. China's after the rare earth minerals because they have a lock on the battery and those sorts of things for, high-end components. There's so much going on. And then there's all the internecine strife inside of Africa that's always been there. Our Western media has never been great at covering Africa. What's some of the core things we need to know before we dig into the details here that a Western audience, an American audience that's not familiar with Africa, that we kind of need to have some ground rules in dealing with something that's so big as this?
Absolutely. I think it's really the military considerations. So I'll speak on that briefly, really quickly. Over the past 5 years, China has been extending its military influence into the region, which is something they had not been capable of doing before. So back in 2017, they opened their first military base in East Africa, in a small country called Djibouti. Kind of a funny name, but it's geostrategically positioned in East Africa, an important region of the world. And it does beg the question, why would China be attempting to spread its influence into that region? And then recently, there have been fears that have come out from the Department of Defense talking about the potential of China opening another base over in West Africa in Equatorial Guinea. That would be their first base in the Atlantic. And so as far as what a Western audience needs to be concerned with, this idea that China is slowly moving bases closer to our region of the world and into regions that they previously had not really been privy to is certainly worrying. Now, on the flip side of that, Russia has also been getting increasingly interested in African politics and African regimes. They have been doing a very odd sort of strategy where they don't have a lot of economic ties with Russia, but what they've been doing is sending in mercenary forces to often kind of quell rebellions or the threat of Islamic terrorism or things of that nature. And then once their mercenary groups are there, the Russians don't tend to leave. And now they kind of have a stranglehold in certain areas, try to reach into places like the Suez Canal and kind of spread their influence that way. So in terms of what's direct, relatable, and applicable to a Western audience, I would certainly say kind of the military jockeying of Russia and China is definitely something that we need to be very aware of. And if we're not, we can kind of find ourselves behind the 8 ball, which I know we definitely do not want to do.
What is it about China? Because here's the problem with China. The CCP and their many minions in social media and in the traditional news media, they get really upset if you call them imperialistic or colonial. Mm-hmm. There's no other way to describe what they're doing in Africa as imperialistic and colonial. Now, they're not doing it so much militarily, although that's starting to happen as well. They're doing it financially. They're doing it through offering loans. They're doing it through what I would call, and many others have, predatory debt. And then they foreclose. We've seen this in Sri Lanka and other places, and now we're seeing it in Africa, where they use predatory debt to get infrastructure interests and take over important infrastructure, airports, ports, things like this. How do we address that? Because the propaganda arm of China is mighty and it's long-reaching, but the facts on the ground say, hey, actions, not words. This is what they're doing, and they're doing it purposefully, and they have a long plan involved here.
You're absolutely right, Andrew. And I think that it would be one thing, if China was actually interested in helping, build infrastructure. We just want to develop Africa out of the kindness of our hearts. Unfortunately, that's certainly kind of not what they are trying to do. You're absolutely right that they do use loans and financing as ways to get countries kind of hooked on Chinese financing. And then they use that to leverage them or to have political leverage over those countries in the future. We've seen that very recently. A lot of African countries used to have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Every country in Africa has abandoned Taiwan except for Eswatini, tiny little country in southern Africa. And China's been putting pressure on them to break off their diplomatic relationship with Taiwan and kind of, get rid of that relationship and recognize China as having the right to that area and things like that. So as far as what the U.S. needs to do, that's really the key to the question here. I think that the U.S., in order to respond to this, needs to prove itself to be integral to Africa's development going forward. And they need to make sure that African leaders see us that way. America still is by far the largest consumer market. We are significantly wealthier than China. We have the ability to purchase much more than they do. And so what my opinion is, what we need to do is expand kind of how trade is done with Africa right now and use that as a catalyst to get African states to recognize that we can be the most important partner for them going forward in their development goals, instead of Chinese debt trap diplomacy, which has been getting less and less popular among African leaders, which is a positive sign. So if you want to go into the AGOA a little bit, I think that could be a wise idea.
Now, here's the problem, and you touch in on your piece.
Yeah.
Money doesn't solve everything. Money also creates its own set of problems. But it's almost like when we watch like a mob movie where the mob, they're like, hey, if we're fighting, we're not making money. Isn't the pitch, though, with trade, and this is on a very basic level of, hey, everybody can make money here. And if everybody's busy making money, just some of the human nature stuff is they're going to want to keep making money. And when people are fighting, they're not making as much money. That's a really distilled down, simplistic view of it to take it to a movie after. But that's basically what we're pitching them with free trade is like, look, all of you can rise all boats here if you stop fighting and do X, Y, Z. And if you get the right kind of partners, that's basically the pitch, right?
I think that is part of the pitch. I wouldn't say that's the entire thing. I do think that there is appetite in Africa for democracy, for human rights. People are very skeptical of Chinese interests, the way China runs its kind of authoritarian grip on its own people. And so I wouldn't say that, free trade and wealth is the only motivating factor, but I would certainly say that plays an integral part. So along with that, what I would say is I believe that African countries that do engage with trade in the United States definitely do benefit. There have been a number of countries in the past decade or so that have significantly developed different sectors through trading relationships with the United States. Now, whether or not we'll be able to use that as enough leverage to say, hey, abandon Chinese financing and come to us will be something only really time can tell. But I would say this for sure. The deepening relationship of economic ties between America and Africa is absolutely integral if we want to keep our influence over there. There's a kind of an isolationist mood right now in the United States. I hope that we can kind of work against that as time goes on, because like it or not, the world is much smaller than it used to be, and we need strategic partners around the world. And a great way to do that is through economic ties and getting African producers and African consumers to recognize the benefits of having access to the U.S. market. So.
Yeah, Alexander Jelloian joining us, and a great Young Voices contributor. We're talking Africa. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to dig into this piece he has at 1828 a little bit. We're going to talk about the American policy, what it should be, what we want it to be, what it actually is, why those three things can't ever seem to match up at the same time in the same place. More with our friend Alexander on Heard Tell right after the break. Welcome back to Heard Tell. We got our friend Alexander back on. We're talking Africa. We talk real here. We deal with the real world on this program. Let's just be honest about American policy. Part of the problem with foreign policy and financial policy, for that matter, is there's a certain amount of inconsistency built into our system. We have presidential elections every 4 years. Congress turns over every 2 years. The American people tend to like gridlock. They like split government for the most part. Some of this is built into the cake, but when we're dealing with foreign policy, the two most important things when we're dealing with foreign powers is consistency and cohesiveness. People got to know what we're going to do and know that we're going to do it. America has been really, really bad at that for the last 30, 40 years, basically my entire lifetime for the most part since the end of the Cold War. What do we do to change that? Because it's hard to pitch things like we will be your trade partner. China's got a 50-year plan. They don't have the Russian 5-year plan. They plan way in ahead. So people are looking like, yeah, I'm making a deal with the devil, but at least I know what I'm getting. That's part of the problem here, yes?
Yeah. No, I do agree with that, Andrew. And I would say, too, I think what has been a good development in the U.S. is there does seem to be kind of a consolidation from both sides, Republicans and Democrats, that increasing Chinese influence in the world is problematic. I have a lot of disagreements with the Biden administration, but one thing I have enjoyed that they do is they will speak out against China, and they sent Pelosi over to Taiwan recently. And so they seem to be, in my opinion, willing to fight back against that. So in terms of what we need to do as a national strategy, I absolutely agree. We have had a very disjointed couple decades of policy towards Africa. And for a lot of it, it seems like we kind of took them for granted. They were not necessarily the most important partner of us. And we did not really give them, I think, the respect and kind of attention that they needed. So going forward, what I think certainly needs to happen is, you're absolutely right, a cohesive, coherent strategy about what we want to see from Africa and what they need to see from us. And I think the best way to do that is to, increase our diplomatic relations and actually begin to speak on the world stage, putting African issues at the very top of our foreign policy considerations, and B, through economic ties. Those two combined if we could really nail those down and prove to African states and African leaders that we mean business, I think that would go a long way in pushing back China's influence in pretty much the near future, if possible.
You use a term in the piece, utilization strategies. You're bouncing that off of what Xi Jinping and the Chinese are doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. They've got billions of dollars they're pouring into that thing. We probably can't do anything like that for a lot of reasons, but break that terminology down for us. Just go through the nomenclature, utilization strategies. What are you talking about? Because again, this is not theory. This is stuff where you're actually going to have to kind of do some practical stuff to win people over, right?
Yes. And now, so in terms of utilization strategies, what that's connected to is the AGOA. So right now, I'll do a quick history on the African Growth and Opportunity Act. This was a bill passed in 2000, basically gives African producers a lot of access to the American market. So goods made in Africa are often duty-free, tax-free, can be shipped here easier, and get preferential access to American consumers. It should make it cheaper, easier for them to develop, things of that nature. Now, utilization strategies are key in this because currently, under the AGOA, they are not required. What a utilization strategy is it requires a country that has the benefits of trade under the AGOA, and it makes them make a cohesive strategy for how they can use their comparative advantage to take advantage of the access given to them by the U.S. market. So basically, a quick example of that, let's say Tanzania comes up with an AGOA utilization strategy about, okay, well, we produce grain. We are able to export that to the U.S. cheaper under the AGOA than other countries around the world because it's specifically a preferential deal for Africa. We're going to make a strategy of how to go about taking advantage of the access we have to the U.S. market. It has worked very well. There's about 18 countries that have made utilization strategies and it's deepened trade ties with America. But when the AGOA gets expanded in 2025, it's kind of up for re-election, the AGOA in 2025 is going to be renewed or expanded. And so I believe that we need to make that a requirement where every country needs to have a utilization strategy in order to have a cohesive plan for how to access the U.S. market. And that has been shown to increase trade ties, which I think would go a long way in deepening economic relationships. So that's what that term means. I'm pushing for that to occur in 2025. I think it would certainly be a wise idea, and I don't really believe there's a good reason not to.
How's that going to look? How does that look, though? Is that going to be a treaty thing? Is that going to be a UN thing? Is that going to be a bilateral with individual countries? Give me a framework for that. Yeah.
Well, the AGOA is a piece of legislation that was passed by the U.S. Congress. So it's not a UN thing. It's nothing in that sphere. What it is a way that the U.S. goes about dictating trading relationships with Africa specifically. So it doesn't take into account, the UN or groups like that. And it's not bilateral in terms of one U.S. state going to a specific single country in Africa. Rather, it deals with Africa as a block of countries going forward.
Great. Alexander Jelloian joining us. Just to put a kind of a cap on this, let's go back to where we started. Africa is a big place. It's a diverse place. It's got a lot of moving parts. How important, because again, like we started with, China's consistent more than we are, consistently bad, but they are consistent. How do we get this consistency? You talk about this being a good concrete first step. Mm-hmm. What's the second and third step? Because that's the key to the consistency we say that's been lacking in these kind of policies.
Yeah, it's a messaging thing, Andrew, and it's a U.S. diplomatic ties thing where if the United States federal government wants to portray itself as long-term interested in African development, it's going to need to be a more consistent messaging platform from the government. So quick backstory on that. In 2014, Barack Obama held the first U.S.-Africa summit. I think that was a good first step in deepening African trade ties. However, 7-8 years have passed, and now the second one will be held in 2022. In my opinion, that's far too long to allow these trade summits not to occur. In my view, that should be maybe every 2 to 3 years, we're having consistent summits with African leaders, with business leaders, oftentimes in Africa itself, and deepening that relationship going forward. We can't be so sporadic in our choice to engage with them. I think doing that will have a long-term impact, and it will actually much more mirror what the Chinese are doing, where they consistently hold meetings with African leaders. They consistently have envoys down there. They consistently have high-level business executives in Africa where they're working on building these relationships. So I think expanding the AGOA, following that up with diplomatic ties is really a good recipe to get us on the road to success here. And, there will be things that happen in the future that we can't see right now. But by doing both of those, I think we can do get ourselves on the road to kind of winning Africa back into our good graces.
Yeah, great stuff, Alexander. Let folks know where they can follow you. We'll have you back on this topic because this isn't going away anytime soon. This is going to be something we're going to be dealing with probably generationally at least. Till we get you back on Hertel again, let folks know where they can follow you. We're going to link to your piece in 1828. Please read the entire thing. Tell us where they can find you and follow you until we get you back, my friend.
Yeah, well, you guys can find me on Twitter at Jelloian, Ajellloian. Also, I would encourage you to check out our website at theiatp.org. That's Initiative for African Trade and Prosperity. We do a lot of work on sub-Saharan Africa, different trade deals and policies that are going on down there, trying to spread economic freedom and free trade going forward. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah, and we're going to keep covering Africa because it's a big part of the world, and the other parts of the world are all converging there. Alexander Gio, and great having you, sir. We'll have you back soon. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Folks, if you've listened to the Heard Tell program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from DC and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are played. Welcome back to Hertel. Okay, we are going to get back to something we used to do on Hertel before the initial itineration of this show, before we started doing the daily program that we do now. One of the things about this format, because we do cut it for radio and media and other things, is we kind of get a little bit limited on the time with our guests. Not that we already don't go long. We always do at least 2 segments with them, but even sometimes there's some topics we want to get deeper on. So we're going to bring back the deep dives. This will be something that comes out on the weekends. It's separate from the daily show. We have 36 of the old school podcast versions of Heard Tell. They're all really great. We're really proud of them. You can find all of them on all the platforms, iTunes, Spotify. You can watch them on YouTube. We've done some effects so that you can watch them if you like, but these will have full video on them. And we're going to deep dive some very important subjects. We've already got the first couple of them lined up, and the first one will be out this Saturday morning. Our friend Chris Schlock was down at CPAC in Dallas. A lot of national headlines about it. He was in the room. We're going to turn down the noise, talk to somebody that was actually there, and some of the things that went on, like the viral moments, like some of the craziness that goes on, the reactions, the attendance, all the stuff, the national narratives. We're going to go inside of CPAC, somebody that was actually there, deep dive it, talk about the big names and the average people that were in the halls. It's important stuff. It's a good topic. Chris Schlock, another one of our great Young Voices contributors, he was there and he explains it to us. This is one part of that interview that's going to be coming out Saturday morning in our deep dive. Enjoy it. When you're doing this, you talk. I know the silly folks start to trend really, really fast. You dealt with some of these, you're tweeting some of them out on your social media. What's the really ones that kind of got your attention? Because you get the folks in the convention hall that are, let's just call it what it is, they're kind of getting their attention, that sort of thing. What's a couple of those? Because you tweeted some of them out, but what's the ones that kind of really jumped out at you, a few of them?
Yeah, so one of them that I did tweet out was Brandon Straka. He's the founder of hashtag Walk Away, which is about former Democrats walking away from the Democrat Party. He's a really Trumpy kind of guy, and he was at the Capitol on January 6th, and he got arrested for a litany of things at the Capitol, and so he put on this performance art where they had like an actual cage next to the walk away booth, and he had an orange jumpsuit and a MAGA hat on, and he sat in a chair in the cage and pretended to cry for like hours. Like, I was actually a little impressed by how long he was able to pretend to cry, and every once in a while he would get up from his chair and right on the chalkboard. Where's everybody? And he'd count the days on the chalkboard too. And so I was getting pictures of that and all, and then all of a sudden, these huge security guys come over, and they push everyone away, and next thing I know, Marjorie Taylor Greene is like right in front of me, and then she goes inside the cage with Brandon, and like gets on her knees and like pretends to wipe away his pretend tears, and like pretends to console him, and then some random guy in front of the cage just extends his arms and pretends to, I guess, be in solidarity with them, and so he just starts saying the Lord's Prayer, and everyone starts doing it with him. And people were saying, Marjorie Taylor Greene went in there to pray with Brandon, but no, some random dude just started praying out loud, and everyone just joined along. So it just kind of reached peak absurdity at that point. So I just took a picture of that and posted on Twitter, and it went pretty viral.
Marjorie Taylor Greene part, and then a few people had picked up on the Shaka part. But you're saying this went on for hours?
Oh yeah, he was crying for hours until he had to speak, and that speech was really aggressive. So it didn't seem like it went as planned. He was on a panel with this guy, Representative Brian Babin. He's a representative for Texas Congressional 36th District, and he was talking about how no congressman called him at all when he was sitting in a jail cell, which he never did. He never sat in a jail cell, so he lied about that. He actually got out of jail time because he was cooperating with the feds and ratting out all of his buddies at January 6th. So he was complaining. He was, acting like he was a victim. He was, getting really upset, and he was basically turning the crowd against Brian Babin, just this one congressman, and saying, "Why didn't you do anything?" And Babin was, a little shaken. His voice was shaky, and people were just like from the crowd heckling him and saying, "Why didn't you do anything? Well, what's wrong with you?" And like it got really bad. And it was after that moment that everyone showed up at the walk-away booth, and the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing happened, and it just, like I said, reached peak absurdity at that point.
Because we only get to see the glimpses, and you're there. Did the Marjorie Taylor Greene, was that planned or spontaneous? What is your feel on, especially with the context you just gave with the speech? Was that planned? That had to be planned then, right?
It
That's
had to
awful
be
good
planned because she was talking about no congressman calling her and all that. I mean, calling him and all that. And so I assume Marjorie Taylor Greene got word of that, or she was listening to the speech, and so she, in an act of performance, showed up and pretended to console him. But since he was going so hard at Brian Babin for not contacting him, I was actually surprised that he let her play along in his performance art, because she never called him either, right? So like I was surprised, like why is he playing along with her? Why isn't he like calling her out for not calling him while she was in the cage?
Yeah, there was definitely some emails exchanged or text messages, and that got planned out. Let's be adults here. Obviously, though, if he's going after a sitting congressman, they're all up for election, so somebody's somewhere in there. On Twitter, it was fun watching it because, of course, I'm of a different group, so I was watching it on Twitter unfold, and they were all immediately like, "Wait a minute, he's the guy that ratted everybody else out, and that's why he's not in prison." But did people there in the room not put those two together? They got Google on their phone, right? They could Google who this guy is while they're standing there. Did you see any hint of that, or was it just go along with the show?
No, everyone was very supportive of him. Everyone believed every word he said. And this guy was definitely swindling everyone, but everyone was like pretending. Like there were people, I'm not sure if they were actually crying, but there were people who were like actually crying, like seeing him like pretend to cry. And they also gave out like silent disco headsets to hear what Brandon was saying, but also there was like multiple channels. And one channel, you get to hear what the stories of other January 6th prisoners had. And people seemed very upset about what was going on. And there were a lot of reporters around the cage, and one of them had a mask on, and so people started to target her. She was a reporter from Vice, and one person was really loud and really vocal, saying, she's from Vice, she's going to slander him, just really defensive of Brandon Straka, and people like started to like crowd around her, and she had before it got like bad, that's when Marjorie Taylor Greene showed up, and so the focus was now on Marjorie Taylor Greene, not on this Vice reporter who's just taking pictures and trying to do her job.
Did you see a lot of other instances with that? Because CPAC's a big event, although this isn't as big as the national one, but Trump was there, so obviously it was a heightened event. Did you see a lot of regular mainstream press, for lack of a better term? Were they there? Were they kind of a low-key presence? Was there other incidences like that?
To me, it seemed like most of the mainstream press showed up on the third day when Trump was speaking. But regarding like just walking around, there were maybe just a few reporters doing that. I know Vice is known for going to right-wing events and like reporting on, quote unquote extremism. But that's like just a Vice thing. So I didn't really get to see the credentials of everyone else. But yeah, I mean, I talked to her, and she said that she was being targeted all day because of her mask, like she was the only one with the mask. There was more people with masks on in the media than, in the whole audience. So people could easily tell, like, she's not on our side.
Yeah.
For the ones who know safety isn't a catchphrase, it's a culture. And the ones who help make sure everyone makes it home safe. For the safety-minded who watch everyone's backs, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as safety assessments and training to keep your facilities safe and your people safer. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Welcome back to Heard Tell Show. We always end on a good note. This one comes from a very good friend of ours, Rufus Hickok. Is a great contributor at Ordinary Times. Make sure you're following him. He writes a column every Sunday at ordinary-times.com. Tremendous gifted writer. Also has a great book out that you ought to check out. We'll link to it in the show notes. He sent us this one, pointed it out on social media to us, from the New York Times. When the pandemic caused food banks to shut down in March 2020, two soup kitchen volunteers, Mahmoud Mahmoudi and Sasha Allenby, borrowed a baker's friend's kitchen to make hot meals for people in need. And that evolved into EV Loves NYC, a nonprofit that churns out 2,000 meals every Sunday from its headquarters at 6th Street Community Center in the East Village. The food is not typical soup kitchen fare. Every weekend, volunteers prepare dishes that reflect the cultural heritage of the chef in charge. That means they are then packed into cars, vans, bike carts, and backpacks to be delivered to New Yorkers across all 5 boroughs. Some 30 organizations, including aid groups, churches, mosques, help with the distribution. Mr. Mahmoudi, 35, and Miss Allenby, 49, both of whom have kept their full-time job despite the 40 hours a week they devote to EV Loves New York City, are also a couple. Of course they are. They're cute, too. There's some pictures here. The March, they moved from the East Village to Brunswick, Brooklyn. And there's an interview of him, both of them together. They talk about it. There's lots of pictures. I want to point out this one quote to there, though. But at the end on the late shift, she said this: "I'm there for cleanup. I'm not particularly a neat freak, but I'm very conscious that the community center is not our space. We rent it, so I want to be respectful and leave it better than I found it." And then Mahmoudi, excuse me. "The last thing we want to do, we close up, is yell, 'Anyone here?' It started as a joke, but now it's a tradition, like the closing bell. It's a big community center. We want to make sure nobody fell asleep under the benches." And then she chipped in, "The prepared packages of food are lined up in the alley, and the organizers turn up to pick it up." And he says, "We go home on the L train. Long live the L train." It's a really cute interview. It's very good work. Appreciate Rufus bringing this to our attention. We always love to end on a good note. Food charities, they always get bumped to the front of the line. That's how we do things here on Heard Tell, and that's how we did it this week. That's the end of the week. You made it to the weekend. Congratulations, folks. contact us at herdtellshow@gmail.com. Herdtellshow on the Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. We do whole segments, whole episodes based off your feedback, things you want. We did the Alzheimer's episode because y'all asked about it, said, hey, we're seeing these headlines. We don't understand it. We reached out, got a whole episode out of it. You can do that too. Reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a good weekend wherever you and yours are. We hope you're well. We hope you're well fed. And we can't wait to see you again for our next Herd Tell. Take care. All the music on Herd Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la banda.